So welcome everyone. My name is Rob Hyslop. I'm the Ecmo and VAD manager at Children's Hospital Colorado. We are embarking on our first kind of organized extension of the coordinator forum in the form of a coordinator symposium. So this discussion was bred out of essentially the coordinator meeting at the ELSO meetings, where there would always be either a formal or informal robust discussion. And in the past couple of years, we've been moving toward kind of organizing that discussion in a more like a panelist format, and that's been really well received. And so some of the feedback that we've heard from coordinators around the country and internationally is that it would be really nice to maybe take this forum for, as far as a symposium to the next level. So we have put together kind of a steering committee of folks that have organized a calendar of symposiums to be offered throughout the year. We're going to be offering these on a quarterly basis with a new topic for each quarter. So the quarter for discussion this evening is starting an Ecmo program. So let me introduce my co-moderator and the panelists. By the way, just to orient everyone, I guess my other title here of interest is that I am the current coordinator liaison for the ELSO steering committee, which is why you're hearing me speak first here. But I really, it is my goal. There's so much expertise and so much experience from all of you. So my goal is only to give a mouthpiece and to give some opportunity to increase the collaboration within the community. So, we do recognize that the goals of this discussion are to provide some panelists and some folks that have some experience in some of the different aspects of initiating an ECMO program to share some of their experience. ELSO has been very supportive of engaging that conversation, supporting that conversation, and supporting increased collaboration and discussion amongst the group of us coordinators. There is a little bit of a precipice in that a lot of what you're going to be hearing tonight is individual people's personal experience, and we really do want this to be an avenue for collaboration and for hearing some individual experience and sharing your own experience in a Q&A format. At the same time, we will be just putting a pin in or highlighting some areas through the course of the conversation where ELSO has made significant efforts to meet the needs of ELSO coordinators, their member centers, etc. So this is not important to know this is not an ELSO education forum. This is a coordinator discussion, an experiential discussion, but we'll certainly take the opportunity to kind of highlight some of the initiatives that ELSO is utilizing to support the coordinator community. So let me segue to introducing our panel. So let me start with Bridget Toy. Bridget Toy will be co-moderating with me tonight. Bridget was just actually promoted to the Director of Children's Surgical Services at NYU Langone Health. She does have a significant amount of experience on the Ecmo side and the surgical side at NYU Langone. If I could ask the panelists just to turn on their microphone and their cameras while I introduce you all so that the audience will have an opportunity. So the first two panelists that we'll be hearing, well, let me back up. We'll be breaking this up into just a little bit of discussion and some shared experience about starting an Ecmo center with in three basic buckets. One is an operational bucket, one is an education and training bucket, and then the third is what to do with this thing about the ELSO registry. Both how to some ideas and how to manage the data entry and some benefits that is received from the registry. So sharing the The education and training component will be Erin August. Erin is an adult Ecmo coordinator at Memorial Regional Hospital. Erin.
Hi.
And then, she'll be joined by Chen, who is a who's an Ecmo coordinator at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. We'll then be talking about some operational considerations that will be covered by some experience shared by Tracy Morrison, an Ecmo coordinator at Miami Valley Hospital. And then we'll be wrapping up with some conversation about the registry by Micheal, who is an Ecmo and advanced technology coordinator at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and I'm sure is known to probably every single person on this call. The woman that needs no introduction. I do, before kind of handing off the mic here, I do just want to reiterate that the intent here is to listen to just a little bit of shared experience that may take anywhere between 35 to 45 minutes. But the goal here is to have a robust discussion about that to follow. And so I'll turn it over to Bridget so she can kind of orient you to the Zoom platform here and how we can facilitate that discussion.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I just wanted to send a reminder to please utilize the Q&A function to submit any questions you have for our panelists. We'll take some time after each session to run through a Q&A to make sure we answer all of your questions. And with that being said, I'm happy to introduce our first panelists, Erin August and Chen, who will be presenting on our first session on education and training requirements.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us with you this evening. Way excited to join you on this and to share our experiences with you. Teng and I both, neither one have any financial investments or ties with ELSO. So as Rob said before, my name is Erin August. I'm an adult Ecmo coordinator at Memorial Regional Hospital.
And my name is Chen. I'm the Ecmo coordinator at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center in in Los Angeles area. So first, before we think about to build up education and training programs, we really have to start with our assessment for each facility. And there are several components that's really important for you to put into considerations. First is who is a staff member that you decide to have them join the training course, and then what is their capability, what is the strength and weakness. A second is your facility needs. What exactly that you would like them to perform in this role, and how much resources you have, what kind of equipment, how many equipments, do you have any technical financial support, how is your staffing and your back capacity. And then also the next one is you really have to think about your patient populations. Do you have more like acute versus chronic illness patients, or the age group or the culture in your community? And what is your limitations? What limited you to provide a long-term Ecmo care, or and what are the limits that you really have to consider, like your limited resources, that back to the resource sections, like if you have staffing issues or your back capacity issues. And then the last one is your program support. That means that how much your hospital is willing to support this Ecmo program, and then also among the different departments in the hospital, that how much they can provide their support to you as well.
So the next slide that we wanted to share with you is talking about the Ecma Specialist. Some institutions refer to them as Ecmo clinicians. So it's based on your program what exactly your formal title is, but under selection, you can have a respiratory therapist, a nurse, perfusion, and also in the ECMO guidelines, it is listed as other or a hybrid thing, where you even have bioengineers or things like that in your institution. We know for us here in the United States, most often for us, it's the respiratory therapist, nursing, or perfusion models. We do have a process that may be a little bit different based on your institution. But a lot of us, I know Wei Ting and I, when we looked at our programs, can share with you our process of going through an interview where we go through and make sure that they meet criteria as far as their background of experience, whether they're therapist, nursing, or perfusion. ICU experience, if they are a nurse, it is a voluntary selection. Most institutions, I know I can speak for my institution, usually nurses that come forward and say, hey, I want to be in the next cohort of Ecmo specialists for training. So most times we hold meetings whenever we are ready to train more, we open it up, we have a sign-up sheet, and then from there we go into the interview process. Staffing considerations as far as charge nurse or release charge nurse. For us, we like to train our charge nurses also as a backup for the Ecmo specialists. It's good to have other people, other leadership in your unit be Ecmo knowledgeable so they can help back your Ecmo specialists in the event that there's an emergency. Team captains, team players. Of course, we know with all of this as a whole, as you have to function as a strong team. So teamwork is very important in your selection and also in training your Ecmo specialist or Ecmo clinician in order to make them most successful. We've also noted at the bottom, just so you can go to the ELSO guidelines for training and continued education. This guideline is great in making sure that you meet the mark with all the criteria that's recommended to make sure that you have a successful team.
Okay, how to develop a course? Then there's several things that you can consider, but then also you can find the ELSO education guideline to develop this course on the ELSO website, and based on that, you need to make sure that your course content is covered with the required learning objectives, and usually started with didactic course. And then after the didactic course, you will have simulation course, which is more hands-on. And then also the second thing that you really need to consider is that your course need to cover based on the strength and the weakness of your ECMO specialists or clinicians. Like the background for RN and RT might be way different, and then how you're going to cover them on their weakened side, and then also empower them on their strength part. And and then the last one is that you will have to customize to your facilities role requirement, ECMO equipment, and really like ECMO is very important is your foundational ECMO knowledge and ECMO patient management, and also troubleshooting and emergency response. So you actually can, and you have to put all this into consideration when you are building up your own program. But then ELSO has a lot of information also on the website, and I provided two links here. One is like adult program, and there's a link right here, and teach you about the ECMO foundation knowledge that you need to have. And the second one is your, and after you finish the course, then you can consider that to evaluate your training, that by adult ECMO certification exam, that you can also take it on the ELSO website as well.
So we wanted to share with you a little bit of our model as far as what we utilize for our camps or our initial training for our ECMO teams. We have ours at Memorial structured kind of like an ACLS course. So we have a day one where we always do didactic in the morning and we do our wet labs in the afternoon, but we kind of build on things like the olden days of ACLS. So we're going to give you the basic principles, the physiology, teach you about the hemodynamics and anticoagulation, those types of things, your patient population. Then in the afternoon, we're going to start to familiarize you with your circuit and your consoles. On day two, we're going to start to challenge you a little bit more and start adding a little bit more to it going into the circuitry a little bit more, and then also start to challenge you as far as taking corrective actions on an emergency and also how to do dialysis off of your circuit. Next, we'll move on to day 3. So on the next slide, and here you can kind of see, like, this is again like the olden days of ACLS where we have the mega code. So we're going to wrap up and giving you the rest of what you need as far as your didactics go. And then in the afternoon, we start to work on an eCPR situation. So working it in these 3 days is nice because you start to learn your foundations, learn your circuitry, learn your an ARDS patient versus a cardiogenic shock patient, and then you go on to your eCPR patients.
Okay, and then this is our course setup for UCLA. We have 3-day course, and the Ecmo, we have a hybrid model for RN and RT, and we name them Ecmo Clinician. And basically, when we develop this course, we try to make sure everybody learn exactly the same thing, will be on the same page, provide the same quality of care to the patient. So the day 1 usually we basically use the tool, the video from ELSO website, the Ecmo 101 class sections, and then after each video, because we want redundancy and keep repeating the knowledge to all of them, so then we will have a lecture to follow. And then so the day 1 we will have the history of Ecmo and then how to cannulate Ecmo, the cannula selections, initiations, and then we will also talk about the UCLA specific Ecmo equipment, like Ecmo circuit and equipment. And then in the afternoon, after we talk about, it's a long day, so then in the afternoon, after we talk about the Ecmo initiation and cannulation sections, we will have them actually do a hands-on, like a mini wet lab, just kind of get familiar with what they learn and then what they play with, and so help them to remember. So for day 2, is more about the patient management. Same thing will follow with the video from ELSO, and then after that, we'll have ICU patient management on either VV, VA, ECMO, talk about the potential issues, north-south syndrome, the shunting, and then after that, we'll talk about the conversion and weaning of the ECMO, and then bring them a little bit information and idea about the ECMO pharmacology. We think it's pretty important, and then we basically just bring them into the door, and then they can start growing and then learn more on this kind of concept. And then in the afternoon, we basically will really well define their role because it's a little bit different than other centers that we have here. So we make it really specific for this role, RN, RT, ECMO clinicians, that what they need to do and they're required to do. And then the last one is because in UCLA, we ambulate our patient basically, we'll joke about it is like the moment they open their eyes, start moving around, they need to get out of bed and walk on ECMO. And because this played a really big piece in UCLA, so we need to make sure that this role that is well educated to make sure that they have a really, they make sure that circuit and the cannula is really secure and safe. And then also teach them how they can assist when the physical therapy or occupational therapy is around, how they can assist and then manage the circuit while the patient is walking. And at the end, we'll have them have a take home online eCPR and peri-procedure ECMO lecture as well, just to make them fully understand and the potential possibility how the patient was put on ECMO. And then day 3 is after the ECMO issue and troubleshooting section lectures that we will have an exam. And after the exam, basically this exam is like an open discussion, but they will have the exam take home first and to really read it themselves and understand and then perform the exam at home. And then we'll have open discussion and then to see if who has the most issue and then concern, and then we can have a group discussion together in the class. And after the exam, it will be wet lab. So in the morning before lunch, it will be the wet lab for the basic concept. And then in the afternoon would be all about like troubleshootings, and then or emergency response to that. So that's our 3-day course.
So on the hands-on training and orientation, once we go through the selection and then we build up to the courses that Wei Ting and I were just going over with you based on our institutions, the next steps are the hands-on training. So in this, we've kind of given you an overview between both of our programs. So the Ecma Specialist, Ecmo RTRN. So depending on your institution, you may have them sit and log as many as 36 to 60 hours of time, and that's pump time that they're actually sitting and being guided by either an Ecma specialist or a perfusionist, depending on your institution. So, and you're sitting for an entire shift. So shifts can be anywhere between 4 to 8 to 12 hours. And we count those hours because that person is not doing anything else but learning the pump and learning how to draw samples, learning how to run pre-post blood gases, and also learning how to do the FiO2 and the sweep. Then after they've completed all the hours, we get with that candidate and we review with them to make sure they feel strong about the orientation they've received and if they feel that there's anything they need more time on. In addition to that, we will interview those that actually sat with that individual to see if there was any kind of concerns or anywhere that there might need to be a little bit more time spent in order to make them confident in becoming an Ecma specialist. After that's done, they will be issued an exam. And these exams, they need to pass as one of the final parts before they can go ahead and sit on their own. We've included in here the buddy shift. The buddy shift is something we implemented at Memorial Regional, and what it is that before your backup person is 30 minutes out, because we have a 30-minute call response time, we actually do a couple of 12-hour buddy shifts with our new Ecmo specialists when they're ready to fly on their own. All this does is that we are there in the house with them, in the ICU with them, but we are not doing anything. We're giving them the chance to start to get into their routine and feel confident, but we're there if there's any other questions. So they get 2 of those and they're on their own. And then also our ICU intensivists or ICU fellows are trained to also know every bit as much as an ECMO specialist. It is a requirement at our institution because that way we know there's a backup all the time. So in addition to our clinical managers being ECMO knowledgeable, our ICU intensivists are also able to jump in and help change an oxygenator, a circuit, or change out a console if there's an equipment failure. So it makes a nice layering of a team when everybody is knowledgeable about the circuit and the patient.
So after the course, we have course evaluation, and then we basically break it to 3 big pieces. Once the course evaluations, we have a post-course surveys from this training. They can always give us input and then see if there's any thing that we need to improve for this program, education program. And then also we have leadership have like weekly, bi-weekly education meetings that ECMO coordinator or RNRT and perfusionist leadership would join and then see if there's any solutions or fix or what we should move forward. And then the second part of it is the ECMO practice evaluation and practice improvement. And this is really the input that we receive from this ECMO RNRT or specialist. We set up for monthly town hall, open for open discussions, and also provide any like newest ECMO practice updates to them. And the second is they can send me the email or in person. They can talk about their issues or their concern, and then I can bring it back to the leadership, the education plan committee meetings. And one more thing is like if we have any like decision, practice change or suggestions, sometimes we open for them to vote to make decision all together. So they are a part of the group. We empower them. And then the last one is the clinician evaluation. Usually we will ask them to do a self-evaluation after the course which is a little bit different than the annual competency, but then it's like self-evaluation right after the course, and then they can address like if there's any component or piece that they want to be they want to learn more or something, then sometimes we can provide the class for them. And then the feedback from the educator, preceptor, and also the staff member is also very important as well.
So we have routine wet labs, competency and evaluations. We can do them on a, like for us, we do them on a monthly basis. Some institutions will do them on a quarterly basis. And it's really helpful to keep everybody fresh on things, especially your new Ecmo specialist and also the intensivists. Our intensivists like to come in on our wet labs just because it helps keep them fresh on doing especially the wet-to-wet connections. We go over troubleshooting any new practice changes that may come along. Emergency response, we do disaster drills just to keep everybody on top of everything with their critical thinking skills, thinking everything through, going from the circuit to the patient. Infrequent practices of ECMO. So if there's something that, typically we don't have all the time, like for instance, an ECPella, those types of things we can go back over to, because it's almost like you have two different devices to consider in those situations, which we can give them a disaster drill and say, okay, well, what's reflective? Is it that I have a problem with the Impella? Do I have a problem with the ECMO, or is it the patient? So it's great to really throw those things in there. Having them focus on everything, including the mid-management side, and considering your labs and your hemodynamics. Annual competency, update and refresh class. So we have a class refresher where we go over and review everything prior to taking the examination, especially if there's any kind of practice changes. Excuse me, that they are even now, as you will notice on our website, we are updating a lot of our guidelines to keep up with changes in practice, updates in practice. So it's great to stay up on the ELSO website with the updated guidelines in addition to any kind of literature that's out there. Evaluation, self-evaluation, peer evaluation, we do both. So we want you, just kind of like your review you get once a year, your annual review, we want you to self-evaluate and say, okay, how do I feel about this? We want feedback on, again, we want you to succeed. We want you to be as strong as you can. And we need to hear from you as much as we give you feedback on what we see as far as your performance goes. One-to-one communication and annual evaluation, again, with this one-to-one communication, with all the annual exams and even initial exams, I will remediate somebody regardless whether they've passed and they're perfect or not. Any ones that they miss, I feel it's important to go over and review. And I cannot stress enough as a coordinator to ensure that your Ecma specialists understand how important it is to have a clear and concise line of communication at all times. That they can never pretend to know what they don't know, and they can never be afraid to approach you if there's something that they don't know. So clear and concise communication is absolutely essential in success for everybody on the team. So we have examples for you. This is what a typical wet lab looks like for us. On the left, you'll see I provided our core principles all the time that we have with our wet labs. So we have an eCPR cart that we have built that we can roll anywhere in the hospital and has everything we need to cannulate. We have our overview of our circuit. We have some things we do with this. We keep one primed and at the ready, good for 60 days. We keep up on the literature with how long we can extend a wet circuit. Also, too, with the overview of the circuit, we go over and make sure everybody feels comfortable with building a circuit, priming a circuit, changing out all the components and sampling off the circuit, as well as CRT initiating on the circuit. That's where we come into building the circuit bridge. We use a leukocyte reducing filter on our circuit. After 6 hours after initiation, we cut that out. And then we have a bridge we practice building, and then we insert that. We have a Y that we never have to come off of ECMO whenever we go ahead and cut the filter out, and that's why we built the bridge. Back to time drills. So for us at our facility, in addition to going through and becoming familiar and feeling comfortable, we also challenge our Ecma specialists to really stay on top of what they're taught. So at our facility, we challenge them, and including intensivists, we challenge them too, that they must change out an oxygenator in less than a minute, cut in a new circuit in less than a minute, be able to build and prime a circuit in less than 5 minutes. So we create teams in the wet labs, and we put our timers on our iPhones and see who is most successful. So while this is very important live time to be able to be quick in an action, because we know some of our patients will unfortunately demise if we're not fast, at the same time, it kind of keeps it fun for them, in addition to doing something that is potentially and can be life-saving for our patients. Disaster drills are the last thing that we do, and that's when I'll bring a circuit into the room. I'll have them step out of the room. I'll pull things apart, and then I'll send them in, and we'll turn it on and start to create a situation and let them figure it out. We also time them on this too, to see how fast it takes for them to figure it out. And then at the end, we debrief.
Yeah, and then for our section at UCLA, our wet lab is right now currently it's like 4 hours wet lab, but the timing can change that based on what we need. And usually we have 4 big P's. One is the basic. If you have any issues about the circuit, like a daily routine management, if you have any issues, or if you have give volume through the circuit and or transfuse through the circuit, then more like hands-on practice. And the second big piece is the troubleshooting. Everybody will need to be able to demonstrate and then and kind of like walk through everything, like make a call about if you have this cone decoupling, or if you have oxygenator failure, or the circuit clouding, then what you need to do and how to respond to it. And the third piece is, again, like UCLA, mobility is really important. So it's a really big piece. So everybody need to be able to know how to secure their cannula and circuit in an appropriate way. And then so it's more like re-emphasize and make sure everybody know, and then also provide them updates if there's any new tool that we're going to use. And then the last one is the start and end, which means that they need to be able to know like what things they need for cannulation and assist for initiations on ECMO, and also be able to learn like how to wean when the patient is weaning off the ECMO. The last thing that we really emphasize is like if the patient is already like withdrawing care in comfort care, they need to know like how to separate the circuit from the patient. So we have a lot of resources from ELSO website, and it's really recommended for everyone to take a look. They provide guidelines, education course, and certification exam. And so again here, before you take your ECMO certification exam, you need to have that dedicated course to have the basic knowledge for ECMO, and then you will have to have some simulation lab hands-on training. After that, you need certain hour requirement for your bedside hands-on training to see ECMO. And after you finish all these 3, then you will be considered like you can go ahead and then try to take this exam. And you can register from ELSO website.
So in taking the steps to the top of the mountain, like Wei Ting was going over, you always want to start with your ELSO foundations first. So these are your didactics. So, and it was 100 global team involvement in the development, which a lot of time and effort went into the development of these modules, which is great. It was great teamwork and collaboration. The nice thing too about this didactic is it says here is self-paced. So you can take your time, because I know if you're like me, time tests make you extremely nervous. So there's no time. There's like, you don't have to have it done in 5 minutes. So you can take your time, because we want you to succeed. In addition to that, there's a total of 53 modules. greater than 80 learning objectives. This, we're told that it takes roughly about 8 hours of your time to complete these, but again, it's self-paced. So, and it will satisfy the learning objectives covered in the certification exam. So this didactic is also something that needs to be completed before you go to the next step. So when you look at the website, you want to make sure that when you're registering and you go through taking these educational courses also, you want to ensure that you take the didactic before you register for the simulation part.
Okay, so there are some links that we provided over here is ELSO guideline and publications for education and training. You guys can, once finish this conference, you can actually open it up and then take a quick look. There's a lot of information on it. So now we will have Tracy.
Rob, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Morrison, and I'm the Ecma Coordinator at Miami Valley Hospital in Dayton, Ohio. And we just started an adult Ecmo program. So we've had a baby program since 1985. Where just the neonatal ICU did ECMO. And obviously we've all been through the COVID pandemic, and we found ourselves sending out a lot of patients for ECMO elsewhere. And some of the times we couldn't find ECMO for the patients that needed it. So next slide, please. Unless I can do it. Okay, thank you. So we formed a steering committee to look into, can we have an ECMO program here for adults? What will it take, and can we afford it? And do we have enough staff? And one of the things I thought we did well was we formed a steering committee. And in the steering committee, we had our COO, who is a physician, and she was capable of approving money and signing checks right away and making sure things got added to the budget. She was the most important person that we could possibly have on our committee. We had a senior medical officer, and he was capable of changing policy. So a lot had to be done to create competencies for the physicians and credentialing for the physicians so they could start cannulating patients. We did have a physician champion who was very excited about ECMO, and he kept things moving along and he kept pushing along. And then an intensivist as well, who was maybe a little more salty, but as interested in having ECMO at Miami Valley as well. And that was a great group of folks to have in there, because we had the cannulator and we had the folks who were going to be doing the medical management. We had 2 ECMO coordinators, myself and our adult coordinator, Nicole, a senior nursing leader that again is used to signing checks and buying hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment. I do think that we probably gave her some gray hair because she was writing so many checks, but again, have the people that you need that can do the work that you need to get done. Our senior respiratory leader helped us get education for our respiratory therapists, as they would be on our team helping to work a lot with the ventilators with our patients. We had perfusionists on this committee because they were going to be the ones that helped teach people what to do and started sitting the pump and priming in the beginning. We had another leader with a great budgetary knowledge, so he knew when the budgets would be coming up due and when we could put more things in the budget. We had our health regulation people who knew what the Ohio Department of Health would agree to, what they don't like, and scopes of practice. And then we had the person there who knew all of the contracts and purchasing. So we'd be able to order equipment, order disposables, and get everything within a reasonable amount of time. It's a great committee. We met every 2 weeks for 5 months until our program opened. Next slide. So there's a bunch of other committees because you've got a lot of work to do when you're starting a new program, but you don't always have to do everything all at one time. And this is an important thing. So those of us who were in the steering committee also participated on different ad hoc committees so that we could report back to the steering committee and get answers on budgetary items, staffing items. The other thing is when you start an adult ECMO program, you don't have to do everything all at one time. So as we were in these other ad hoc committees and looking at staffing and education and training, we decided to just start doing adult VV and taking care of our COVID patients. We are just now getting ready to start doing adult VA. We had a plan and guidelines in place if we had a VA, and we had another center that was willing to take them. We're just now getting into ECMO transport. So we've been not open a full year yet for our adult program. And we are getting more into having physical therapy involved so that our patients can be awake and exercise. And another good committee that we're just starting to get into is our quality committee, starting to start and think about quality improvement ideas. So all great committees to get going. Next slide. We had to select a staffing model, and this might be one of the hardest things you do. We talk about it a lot. We talked about it today on the transport call. You know how it is. We have so many nurses or so many RTs and perfusion. We only have 5 or 6 perfusionists right now at our center. So our original model was perfusion based, where they will pump, well, they will prime the pump, and then the nurses take over, RNs take over in the adult CT ICU and become the Ecmo specialist. It's worked out very well for us because we've had the perfusionists as our backup, helping us to change circuits, helping us to understand physiology, helping us to become more confident and continue to give us education along the way. There is another model that I think will switch to, which is the ICU model. The ICU model is either a respiratory therapist or a nurse, and they watch more than one patient, usually, and act in the ICU as the specialists, do the change outs, and take care of the pumps. The research shows that all you need is 10 patients in 1 year to make the ICU model cheaper. Perfusion makes more salary. So at the point where you hit 10 patients, and if you're a perfusion-based center, you might want to look at changing to a nursing-based center or ICU staffing model with RT or nursing, because the research also shows there's no increases in accidents or preventable problems. The single provider is where the nurse takes care of the patient and the pump at the same time. We felt as a new program that we needed the support of 2 people in the room in the beginning, and both would be Ecmo specialists and both could learn at the same time. And so their exposure would go up. So they would get more experience. So again, that's why we chose the ICU model. And then there's like this new hybrid model where there's more people involved. The perfusion are still involved, and RTs and RNs. And it kind of goes based on the acuity of the patient. So you may have a VA patient that couldn't come off pump and is very, very ill and might have to go back into surgery. Well, that patient might need to be taken care of a perfusionist. Whereas you may look at your other patients and it's a VV patient that's stable, and maybe those patients are given to the nurses or the respiratory therapy specialists. That works very well too. And I think one of the things you've got to think about is how complex your pumps are, and try to have all the pumps the same, and it makes staffing so much easier and safer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and thank you for covering me as I was being a struggle bus with my unmute button over here. Appreciate you bailing me out on that one. Just to touch base on something that was mentioned before, I think what we'll do is we'll go through all of the presentations. There have been a lot of great questions that have come into the Q&A. Please continue to submit questions to the Q&A. We are jotting those down, and then at the end of Micheal's presentation here, we're going to group those questions into as many common themes or threads, and put those to the panelists and open the discussion from there in that manner. So please keep the questions coming. We'll get to answering as many as we can here very shortly. So our next presenter is Micheal Hurd with some ELSO Registry considerations.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us into your living rooms or offices today. I just get to talk a little bit about the ELSO Registry, which is kind of a necessary evil of any Ecmo program, for lack of a better phrase. I think Whiting is advancing my slides. So the registry's been around since 1989, so it's as old as ELSO is. It really was the first primary objective of ELSO, was to have a place where patient experiences could be shared and people could kind of see how other people were learning to do ECMO. It was volunteer data entry. It was based on evidence. And in the old days, it was all collected on paper that we would fax in or mail in even to the ELSO office. So good old days. Next slide. So why should we do it? Well, really, collecting data is the foundation of a quality ECMO program. If you don't know what you're doing, then you're never going to be able to review how well you're doing it. So that's the only way to know if you're doing well. How is our survival statistics? How are our complication statistics? How do you know if you're improving? If you've made a change and now you are looking backwards to see if you've made an improvement from a previous statistics, that's the only way to really know if you've made something better. Next slide. So data entry is really based on 4 different foundations. First, you're going to start off with a center selected data entry personnel. You're going to have that personnel take the data entry exam to assure that they have a knowledge level. You're going to want to make sure that you read the definitions to assure that there's consistency in the data collected. And then finally, we have a registry support that can assist with questions and issues that you may have within your own program. Next. So first, just quick and easy is how to select your data entry personnel. So under the Manage tab on the ELSO website, you'll see Center Website Users, and this is where you can then select the individual's roles. So after you've entered the personnel, you eventually get to go to their individual site, and you can pick what you want them to do. So make sure that you've selected your personnel appropriately. And then next, you're going to have that person make sure that they take the data entry exam. They will not be able to enter data into the registry until they've taken this exam. So every person that you assign this role will have to take the exam. It cannot be just a broad, everybody in the center has one person take the exam. It assures that the definitions are applied accurately. It's currently only required once, but we are beginning to ask for a refresher so that any new updates are assured that people have knowledge of what's new in the registry. Data entry itself. So this is probably one of the biggest questions we've been getting lately, especially with all the pandemic staffing problems. It's time consuming. Like, how much time does it take to collect data? And I think that's very individual. Once you do it, you get better at it, so it gets faster. But there are other ways that you can do it to really decrease the amount of time that it takes for one individual to enter and collect all this data. Can you involve your team? I know some programs use paper sheets at the bedside so that as things happen, they get jotted down so that somebody doesn't have to go backwards and comb through a chart to find out when oxygenators were changed, when complications happened. There are some automatic downloads that you can do within your EMR. Can you use REDCap? A lot of Epics have the ability just to click that REDCap button and it'll download automatically into REDCap. Have you really considered using the XML data import capability within ELSO? That can potentially save you a lot of time. Next slide. So why is the registry important? Why do I need to collect this data? Well, we talked about its purpose for quality. So this is where you're going to want to use it for your morbidity and mortality, your internal quality reviews. Of course, if you're in a institution that likes to write, you're going to have publications and research studies capabilities as well. Under the ELSO Registry tab, there are reports and data export capabilities that you can do so that you can download your own data as well. And next. And then finally, I just wanted to mention the quality reporting platform, which is Arbormetrics. So this is available to all centers. And just as a side note, it is a required component of a Center of Excellence application. So when you go under the registry tab, you'll see quality reporting platform. And when you click on it, you'll see this page pop up where you can learn about what it is. You can figure out how to get started and then actually go into it to figure out and see what your data looks like. And on the next slide, the first page that pops up for an individual center is kind of this snapshot dashboard look to it. And then along the side, if you go to the next slide, you really get to use your filters. And this is where you can select your peer groups. As long as the group is greater than 10 members, it's going to be included as a potential peer group. So regions is North America. Of course, there's more than 10 members in North America. This can be a problem in some countries where there's less than 10 Ecmo centers. You can pick your age group, you can pick your patient volume, you can pick your dates, you can pick the type of Ecmo that you want to look at. And then once you get into that, then you get all kinds of reports that you can compare yourself to those type of programs. If you have any questions, the registry support at elso.org email is very available. Remember that it is all volunteer supported. So questions might take a couple of days to get an answer to, but we try hard to answer every single email. Thank you.
Thank you, Micheal. What Micheal means by it's all volunteer supported is that Micheal ends up answering almost the entire international Ecmo community's questions. So we all owe our debt of gratitude a couple lifetimes over. Okay, so that concludes the presentation portion of the forum. We have kind of packaged the questions that have come into the Q&A into a couple of topics. So we'll start there, and then as we proceed in the discussion here, we're going to put these questions to the panelists and to hear some different viewpoints. And then if you do have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to share follow-up questions or additional questions in the Q&A. So Bridget, I'm actually going to turn it over to you and let you ask the first question.
No problem. So to start off our Q&A session, we wanted to touch base on education and training. So one of the first questions we received is, for internal training courses, who is teaching the courses? Is it a group of physicians, Ecma specialists? Who do you recommend teaching your training courses?
So I can kind of cue in a little bit on that one. So it's a collaborative effort when we teach our internal classes. What we have done with what I had shown on the slide for Memorial is that our physicians, mainly the intensivists and also our Ecmo surgical director, they will take the lead. We do follow along with perfusion. So we're each assigned a portion. That way we can all add in a little bit of our expertise when we're teaching the overall team.
Our section's pretty much similar. We have a surgeon, mainly the surgical director of Ecmo, and then we have an ICU intensivist that also is the medical director on Ecmo, a very senior perfusionist, and myself to cover the patient care part.
Great, thank you both. And a follow-up question for this is, do you have a maximum participant count for your courses? Do you have a specific cap you set?
So we like to have no more than 6 in a group whenever we're training Ecma specialists. The reason being is we want to maximize their time, especially in the wet lab portion. We want to make sure that everybody gets an adequate amount of time spent with their hands on the circuit, getting to prime, getting to change out oxygenators and such, learning all those pieces. So we feel any more than 6 in the group kind of takes away from their core learning skills.
And for us here, we usually prefer no more than 11. What we had done is we have 11 people, but we provide 3 circuit. So pretty much like 1 circuit, like 3 people per circuit or 4.
And while on the topic of the wet labs and simulation, do you require your physician to attend a certain amount of wet labs or simulation sessions initially, as well as do you have any recurring requirements?
So for us at Memorial, our physicians, we start them by proctoring for 10 cannulations. So the first thing our intensivists do is they work along with the surgeon for a total of 10 cannulations. After they've mastered cannulation, we move them then to the wet labs. So we have their participation in the wet labs when they're new coming on board after they've just initially done the 10. We have them join as one of the members. After that, then we have them actually help run a wet lab. That way it's kind of what it would be for real if it happened in the unit. So they are required to attend on an annual basis, but we like the fact that they love to show up even more. So we have wet labs on a monthly basis, and we just make sure our intensivists know when we're going to have them. We have them in the unit to make it very convenient for them, and almost every time, unless something's really going wrong, they stop in because they love to do, especially the wet-to-wet connections.
For UCLA, our surgeon is mainly the cardiac surgeon, and then the fellow will follow with the surgeon for each cannulation pretty much almost every day. So they are pretty well trained. And then for our ICU fellow, when they first take the rotation role at the beginning of their maybe 1 or 2 years in cardiothoracic ICU, they are required to come to this class. So all of them need to join exactly like 3-day Ecmo training course.
Great. And, since simulation and wet labs are such a vital component. Sorry, Erin, do you mind just muting yourself? Okay. But since, simulation and wet labs is such a vital component of ECMO education, so 2 more questions about it. The first question is more of like a logistical question. Do you use any specific simulation equipment? How do you pull together the equipment and supplies to run the simulation? And then do you run any in situ simulation?
So
Erin, I think
you're on mute
now.
there it goes. Sorry, it didn't pop off.
No
so
worries.
we end up gathering supplies all the time. So if there's anything that looks like it's going to expire or coming near to expiring, we're a little bit of a hoarder kind of situation where we put everything together. So that way nothing ever goes to waste. We say it's a wash versus a waste. So we gather these types of things, and if anybody's ever seen my office, I have a stack of stuff in there. We actually have a mannequin that one of our Ecma specialists has made that we use for ECPR, because we've made it that they have the gel molds that the physicians can practice with their cannulations to keep up with their practice. Then we layer on top of that. So we have, in addition to wet labs, we have an ECPR drill every month. So we can bring the 2 worlds together. So having simulation is important. We also are just looking into purchasing Califia. We're going to do Califia in the cloud. So if any of you happen to have a chance to look online, there's actually a virtual reality simulation in addition to a hands-on simulation that you can now purchase from Califia, and there's also a mannequin you can do. So it's kind of a neat, different mix of things. So we have VR plus hands-on.
Yeah, for us, in terms for equipment, we have enough of equipment set up as a backup, so we can always grab as long as we just make sure that the department is aware that we will hold like 2 to 3 circuits, and then also the any expired. So people will now giving me like any supply that's about to expire, they will all give it to me. And then same thing with Erin. It's like I don't know where to stack them, but definitely we don't waste that. We just use that for more trainings, and then and if like for example like some of the equipment is really limited because maybe we have like 11 14 ECMO or like on in the unit at once, and then we might be running short with ECMO circuit or equipment, then usually what I do is I contact the company rep and say, and then they're actually really good and friendly. Is like they'll be supported. Like I will tell them that in certain day I need their help to provide the equipment for wet lab, and then they have no problem with it.
So I'd like to follow up on 2 questions that just came into the chat. And Micheal and Tracy, feel free to jump in on these questions as well. There was a question about what kind of education is provided to bedside nurse, but along the lines of the bedside nurse, what kind of like staffing ratios or staffing considerations are made with ECMO, and what are some of the different ways to handle that consideration?
So for staffing here, we have 1:2 ratio. For both RN and RT, we have a hybrid model, and then it's doable and it's manageable. And then in terms for hands-on at the beginning of the training is everything. Like even though they have didactic class that in the classroom, but then we are required. Right now we have the assigned perfusionists to train them. So they are required to relearn everything just to make sure that they will remember, and then in details. And then so from either like the management of the setup on the flow, RPM versus like giving blood and everything, you will consider like the entire circuit. They have to have another hands-on wet lab, but it's on the actual patient, and then which is supervised by the perfusionist.
And we're kind of doing the same thing. With us, it depends on the acuity of the patient. The majority of our ECMO patients are kept 1-to-1. The Ecma Specialist is a pump ratio of 1-to-3. For myself and perfusion, we have a pump ratio of 1-to-4. We just put together not long ago a boot camp for nurses for the bedside nurse. We thought it would also be a great way to groom future ECMO specialists. So we had put together a curriculum for them, and we have purchased a Springer textbook about bedside care of the ECMO patients for them.
So I can tell you that at our hospital, we do have bedside education for the nurses. And we also right now do 1-to-1 care. So 1 specialist for 1 pump, and the patient also has a nurse. So we've done that in the neonates forever. We use a roller pump. We think that's safer. For the adults with the centrifugal pump, we're going to eventually mesh out to 1 person watching 2 pumps. I spoke to a center this week where 1 person watches 10 pumps. And I'm really curious to hear what people, if they have, what is their high number? And as for the number of pumps that you can watch, because I can't find anything written anywhere saying that you should not go above a certain number.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy. And like certainly the pandemic has forced us into creative thinking on that, right? At our center, we needed to take a very non-traditional approach to what we normally do the one Ecma Specialist, and we ended up cohorting all of our patients in the ICU that was non-traditional and ended up taking hospital assignments. So it's a very relevant question for the environment that we're in, for sure. On the following, or staying on the thread of operations, for your centers, do you have someone available that can cannulate in-house 24/7? And then, yeah, what are some of the like just considerations as far as system deployment on a around the clock basis? Or some of the challenges there?
I might answer, and then I'd be interested in hearing from Micheal. But I can tell you, as a new adult center, our CT surgeons have 30 minutes to get into the hospital. So they've been cannulating the adults. But we've come to find out now that we've done a few eCPRs, which there wasn't a committee meeting for yet. We are looking at perhaps involving trauma, because we have a very large trauma program at our hospital, and they have surgical critical care fellows. And so trying to get folks from there and or interventional radiology who are in-house to cannulate eventually to help our CT surgeons. So again, like having people like start slow and then move into other areas and add more people to the team.
We use both pediatric surgeons as well as CV surgeons to cannulate. There's been some discussion to look into adding in the interventional cardiologists potentially, but that has not occurred yet. And their credentialing is really just mentoring and observation is their skill.
For us, we do have people in-house 24 hours a day that can cannulate. That's our CV ICU intensivists. So that's why they all go through with the CV surgeon and have to be proctored for 10 cannulations. They will go ahead and before they do, they will call quickly with any referral and talk with the CT surgeon. CT surgeon and the intensive both have to agree they meet our criteria or meet the ELSO guideline criteria before we will go ahead and initiate ECMO on the patients. So, but we don't have to wait for the surgeon to come in because like most of you have shared, we too have a 30-minute response time to get to the hospital. So we thought to be faster, we went, especially for eCPR, we wanted to have cannulators in-house.
So here at UCL,
and that's a long.
Oh, sorry. You want to go ahead?
No, please share.
So here at UCLA, what we have is we have 24/7 cardiac thoracic surgeons, and they are basically whoever they're on call. I feel like they never sleep, so they'll be available when we have like any in-house code blue, eCPR, or even in ED. They'll do it. They'll be ready. But then on top of it, it's really like ICU intensive is very experienced as well. They can actually put a sheet in arterial venous sheet in, and then once the surgeon arrives, then it will be much faster for this process as well.
I'd love to hear if any of you have any tips for new centers starting out and who are looking to gain hospital administration buy-in to support a 24/7 in-house ECMO team, whether that means a surgeon or the ECMO specialist or perfusionist.
I think one of the biggest things is to make sure, especially to whenever administration, you come in with a wonderful budget that also will be something that can speak to what we call the bean counters. So I, as a nurse, never thought in my lifetime I would spend so much time on the phone with the CFO and the director of finance. So I ended up now also, getting into and being a part of contracting because our perfusion service is contracted. So it kind of takes you down a rabbit hole, but to be able to speak the language of the financial side, but also help them to understand from a clinical side. It is extremely important. The same with legal and risk. You know, you have to be helpful to them, and then you can also learn from them because you can bring the clinical terminology to them. So I can honestly say I have learned so much more than just being a clinician.
From my side, I would really suggest that first the assessment, because I think to evaluate how your center can support this entire Ecmo program is very important, and everybody need to actually gather as a group to meet maybe like multiple times before you actually start building. And the second is the persons that the clinician, the specialist selections, because first thing that you can see in the slide, we have like volunteer, but then also like how many experience you have. I saw in the chat somebody mentioned about like 2 years experience or something, but if you just barely like trying to build up an ECMO program from scratch, experienced people will usually kind of like be able to foresee more issues or potential issues, or when they actually do their orientation shift or hands-on training, they actually, I feel like I got a lot of input from the first several groups that usually give a lot of suggestion, and then that's how it actually, even just like the programmer of the course, how it lay out, or even the old practice, the previous practice, or the current practice, they'll give a lot of suggestion, and you'll be amazed like how much they can provide. And then based on that, we may probably never think about it 10 years ago. I mean, for the past 10 years, but then now we start thinking about it, and then we can slowly like improve our practice on ECMO care. So I don't know about other centers, like how they feel, and then also the staffing capability, but I just really think that if you have people that's willing to take this role, and then like volunteer things, but then also has like plenty of experience, I think that would really help when you first start with the program. And then later on, when the program is much more stable, then I don't think that we have to be really like strict about how many years experience you need to have.
There's a question in the chat about, again, harkening back to the environment that we live in with COVID, or at least emerging from the pandemic. But we're certainly at a shortage of critical care resource. And so what kind of ICU experience does everyone look for in their Ecma specialist? And then is there, are there, what would you view as like a minimum amount of, would you say that ICU experience is a minimum criteria or qualification to be a coordinator? And how would you view any of those considerations as far as minimum years of experience and where that experience is gained as preparation to both participate in an ECMO program as a specialist or to lead an ECMO program? Tracy, do you want to start with that? Yeah.
So our adult ECMO coordinator was a very experienced open heart nurse. So she was already very experienced with balloon pumps and CVVH and the Impella, and she regularly took care of fresh hearts and trauma. I believe traumas maybe too, but fresh hearts for sure. So that was a very good fit for somebody who was learning all about ECMO as a very experienced nurse. But our ECMO specialists, we usually want 2 years of experience, because we want them to be at that point where they're critically thinking and they can organize their time. And for adults, we wanted them all to be open heart nurses. So 2 years.
Micheal, do you want to share your experience on that? Not to put you on the spot.
No, it's all right. I think the time is probably about the same for everybody. I think really what you're looking for is you don't want to have to teach somebody how to be a critical care person first and then teach them ECMO. You want them to already have those foundations of what it means to be in critical care or in cardiac care. Because if you have to teach all of that and ECMO, your ECMO training course is just way too long. So I think having that experience, having your advanced competency type nurse who already has mastered critical care or cardiac care is really important. The same with respiratory therapists. They should be ICU therapists. They should not be your floor therapists who haven't dealt with ventilators and those critically ill patients. So I think you have to determine within your own institution what your criteria as far as time is going to be. And perhaps you can use some different kind of tools. Maybe you could do an assessment, a test. Recommendations are always great. How does this person work in a high stress environment? How is their critical thinking skills? What do their peers think of them? What do their supervisors think of them? Because some people are absolutely brilliant at a year and some people are never going to be brilliant. So you have to decide how you're going to determine those people that are really best for your team.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that before we move on?
I can share a little bit on my side. So because our acuity in UCO is really high, and also we require so much on ECMO patients based on each, like, multidiscipline, like every team has really high standards to set up with. So it's really like we don't have time with the volume that we have on our side, that we really don't have time to really teach. Just like Micheal was talking about, that we don't have time to teach them how to be an ICU nurse or ICU RT in before they take this course. So I wouldn't say that we set a really hard limit. We're really looking for the volunteer, like people is willing to learn, because I think the attitude is really important. And then the second is the average years of experience that we have currently is like 10 years. We have some 5 years and they are amazing as well, but it's really like a lot. And then also it depends on your center. Like a lot of nurses come over, or the RT come over, is because they probably want to go back to school for their experience. So then people, you tend to like stay little longer, might be much more stable for us. So that's why we also consider that as well.
For us, we too, just as Tracy said, we like a minimum of 2 years experience. We also look at clinical ladder as well, if it's a nurse who is becoming an Ecma specialist. They can utilize this as clinical ladder. Most of our Ecma specialists who are nurses are now clinical ladder 4, so which is at one of the top rungs. Coordinator-wise, I can share with you, I ended up coming into the Ecmo world in 2009. Previous experience for me, I was a VAD coordinator for many years. I know a lot of other coordinators that I talked to, they are also VAD coordinators who are nurses that have transitioned into the Ecmo world.
So for new centers, where would you suggest that they look for to bring in that experience when they're starting up a program? Would you recommend hiring an experienced Ecmo coordinator who was at an external organization, any job boards or the ELSO job boards?
I think that would be a great idea. You know, the job board on the ELSO website is a wonderful resource. Also, just kind of utilizing the center map to look and see who is my neighbor that already might have an ECMO center that I can consult with. Those types of collaborative efforts are great, because I know, as somebody else mentioned on the panel before, Tracy, I believe it was you, if you start a center, you may not be able to keep the patients, so you can start those collaborative efforts also as to where can you send your patients if you're not ready to hold on to those patients yet while you're building. So I think collaboration is a great way to start, but you do need a strong person as your coordinator. As many of us have already been through. I've built several programs from scratch, and I can tell you, you become air traffic control for your program. You know, it's with a strong coordinator. You've got to keep all the pieces together and connect all the dots. And that, I think, is so important, because it's very easy for things to fall apart or things become siloed if you don't have a strong coordinator to keep it together.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to kind of wrap a couple up here. There seems to be, there's a lot of questions about, is it absolutely mandatory to have critical care experience? Is it absolutely mandatory to have perfusion involvement to be considered, you know, center of excellence, or any other ELSO designation? So I would just put the question out there as this. Do you guys see, and I might start with Tracy or Micheal on this one. From your experience, do you see absolute indicator, anything that absolutely you have to have this background or this involvement, or what kind of flexibility do you see in the way that different programs structure their program? Erin, I would also be very interested in your perspective on that one, since you have started up a number of programs. So whoever wants to go first.
Tracy, you want to go first?
Sure. I do think they need to have critical care experience, because I think they need to know all the drugs, they need to know all the weaning, all the things that comes automatically with a very sick patient. Now, I'm in an NICU, so when I have someone from an NICU come, I'm looking for the babies on the nurses on the small baby team that are taking care of those extremely fragile 23, 24 weekers. They make great Ecmo people. And I look at the people who are doing response and that are going all over the hospital resuscitating babies. That kind of personality also goes really well with the Ecmo world, that adrenaline, that little bit of a different day every single day you work. They do well. I have not ever trained anyone that has not had a critical care background.
And I echo Tracy, because I feel that's important too. Like, even with the way our program's set up, we actually have a secondary cart that we keep with every ECMO patient that you have to be able to know, and we're given guidelines from the physicians as to when to push calcium chloride, when do we need to push bicarb based on the gas that we get. You know, but we also have to be forethinkers and think along the lines of an intensivist, because as soon as we get the gas, you know, sometimes we need to act fast. We're given ranges in which to keep, like our pH 7.35 to 7.45. And if that patient's starting to tank quickly, we have to be able to act. So we have orders to protect ourselves. We have an ECMO order set, then also a PRN order set in which all the medications in that cart are covered, along with the ranges in which we are ordered to keep. So therefore, we're not acting out of scope to act quickly, because again, we don't always have time to wait to try to get somebody on the phone. You know, not pushing a bicarb can really make a difference on whether that patient has a good or bad outcome. So that you really need a high-end critical care thinker. Just as Tracy said, I echo the same thing. If you are not an adrenaline junkie and you have a weak stomach, Ecmo is not the place for you. So you really have to have an iron will in order to succeed in this profession.
And I think I would just answer the part of the question about, do you have to have specific disciplines involved in your program? I think somebody was asking whether you had to have a perfusionist specifically. I don't think there's anything in any of the guidelines or anything in the Center of Excellence, for example, that says you must have X, Y, or Z. What we really want to know is that you've looked at what personnel you believe you need. ELSO believes that you need an Ecmo medical director, that you need an Ecmo coordinator, somebody who is administratively involved in the Ecmo program, but it doesn't necessarily say who that person should be. I think that if you're starting a new Ecmo program, it would behoove you to have somebody who has some knowledge. You know, there's enough people out there in the world now that know what Ecmo is and know what it means to administrate that type of program. And so if you just pick a staff nurse out of your ICU, or you pick one of your perfusionists out of the OR, they may not really understand what it means to administrate a program. And that's really what your coordinator needs to be, as an administrator as well as an excellent clinician. And having that knowledge of how Ecmo is different is very helpful. I think Erin was the one who said, you know, she was a VAD coordinator. I think any of those type of experiences are very valuable. So if you're maybe not super knowledgeable at Ecmo, but you know what it means to be a VAD coordinator or that type of mechanical circulatory support specialist, that's really valuable. You can learn Ecmo. It just helps to have experience in it so that when people are hitting the fan, they know that they can count on you.
And again, I think that if you want to include perfusion when you start, like that's how we did our neonatal program in 1985. So perfusion did prime then, and I could call them when I needed an oxygenator change. And then when our team got developed enough, perfusion said, you know, we're ready to be hands off now. And they stayed in the OR and we did everything else. We just run the program ourselves now and don't have any perfusion involvement. But I also know that if I did call them for something crazy, they would come because we've kept a really great professional relationship with them. So, you know, it's great for starting out. Like the more experts you have, like the safer you're going to be. And you have to think about keeping your patient safe because it is a high risk, high interventional type of patient. So you need to make sure that you've got everyone around the table that can keep your patient safe. And perfusion does a great job at that.
Thank you so much for your responses. We're going to wrap up with our last question. So coming from experienced Ecmo programs, do you have any experience partnering with smaller community hospitals that are starting Ecmo programs in order to eventually transfer or for help in training and education? If so, do you have any tips on working out a strong relationship for both the bigger center and the smaller Ecmo center?
So we have started doing this type of thing with our neighbors, and how we kind of were able to start building these relationships was through, we were one of the first centers in South Florida to go out and cannulate in other facilities. Whenever we came in and took care of the patient and everything, there was always a lot of questions. You know, it draws a crowd when you walk into another facility and you're putting someone on ECMO. After that, when we call to do the courtesy follow-up to the facility to let them know how their patient is, because you're layering on as another step of the care team, they started to ask other questions. So it's been very exciting for us here in Florida. We actually have a program in Fort Lauderdale that we help them to start their program. They mirror our program. And whenever they need us, we will transfer patients from their facility to ours because of bed capacity, or, you know, they're still perfusion driven and we can't stop other service lines. And that's another big thing to consider when you look at your model. If you pull perfusion away from your open heart programs, it's a problem. You should never disrupt another program within your own hospital. So it's always good to kind of keep that in the top of your head, you know, when you're thinking about building your program. But, you know, we've made great relationships all the way up to Jacksonville, helping other centers start their program. We've invited them down. We've had them come in. We've had them even sit with us to start to learn the pump. We've done the same thing for other centers as we've done for our own staff through working with their administration and ours to cover all of our, you know, dot our I's and cross our T's. But we were able to train them to then send their staff back to start their programs. And then if they had questions between the coordinator that they chose up there and myself, and along with the physicians, we would keep an open line of communication with them to help to make sure they would succeed or would help them problem solve as they were continuing to build.
So I just want to share a little bit for UCLA because we have a mobile Ecmo program that our surgeon and the group will actually send out to the community hospital, cannulate the patient and bring the patient back. And I think currently we are the only one in LA area. So we get out a call and referral, and then so we build up the relationship with the community hospital around LA area, and we can drive all the way to like probably like 80 miles. One time the surgeon drive it up to like 100 miles just to bring the patient back. And sometimes if we can actually have the patient have helicopter lifts, then we will accept them as well. Besides that, during the COVID pandemic, we actually formed a Southern California Ecmo Consortium. It's like Southern California's any Ecmo center will basically have a group meeting and then talk about the solutions, share experience of taking care of COVID patients. And we also have like UC consortium, which is we meet monthly and then just also share with all the Ecmo experience as well. So I think building relationship amongst each Ecmo center is really important. Yeah, you can also learn from each other. And then we also actually went to visit USC, which is near us, and then to visit their program because they have a different Ecmo model, which is I think is the ICU one-on-one. The nurse will take care of everything, the circuit and the patient. So we were there visit them.
Thank you so much, everyone. There was a last question about whether we would be willing to share contact information. I'm certainly not asking any of you that are on like that feels uncomfortable to you. We're not able to share in the question and answer portion of it because we're signed in as panelists, and so we can't ask questions there. But I did just put my contact information, both my email address and my cell phone number, in the chat box if you want to look over there. And then, you know, anyone else on the panel that would like to, but I'm certainly not. I totally understand if you have reservations. So I think that wraps us up for this evening. Thank you so much for everyone's participation tonight. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Bridget, for co-moderating. I really appreciate everyone's involvement in this. We will be doing this on a different topic with a different panel, and for that matter, a different group of moderators on a quarterly basis. So please keep your eye on the ELSO newsletters and communication for updates on what the upcoming schedule and links for those. The discussion this evening will be available on both the ELSO YouTube channel and there will be a link on the ELSO website. I'm sure that if anyone has any other questions about finding any other information that's available tonight, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone that joined us tonight. Thank you to the panelists, and please have a great evening. Good night, everyone.